Hi, and welcome back to Zo Talks. This is a show where we discuss all things mental health. We focus on adolescents, the mental health industry, and the education industry. This is also the show where we wanted to discuss all things difficult. What are some of the burning questions on your mind that you want to talk about? I'm Christina. I'm from Zoala. We're a generative AI tech startup company.
And I'm Joanna. I'm from wwyd, a youth counselling center.
And the topic for today is quite a difficult one.
Yes. I'm a bit nervous.
We're exploring the differences between a school counselor versus a private counselor.
Yeah.
Now, that inherently isn't so difficult, but this stems from
the feedback we've been getting
Yes.
about and it's not, I mean, it's both from personal feedback with our friends and family and feedback we
as a private
see.
counselor.
Yeah, and how parents are not very satisfied with their child's school counselors and feel like essentially feeling that more could be done or more should be done, but it's not happening, and yeah, it adds on to their frustrations.
So I suppose through this topic for today, or through this episode, we wanted to kind of highlight a few reasons why there are those differences that exist, and the fact that actually school counselors are trying to do the best that they can with what they've got.
Yeah. So the more straightforward answers of what's the difference is, for example, the funding, right? So private counselors, of course, they charge way more because they are not government funded. They don't have that kind of financial support. But because of that, they have more free reign to kind of carry out counseling on their own terms. Whereas for school counselors, you have the word school in front of counselors. So they belong to a specific learning institution, and their role is to basically increase the students' capacity to be better learners, right? Because you go to school, and they're there for learning purposes. If students face social difficulties, emotional difficulties, they see the school counselor to try to resolve that so that they can, be a better student, a happier student in the classroom. Yeah. And I think that's where some parents end up a little bit dissatisfied because they feel that the school counselor can't address adequately some of the issues that a student
that might fall a little bit on the outskirts.
Yeah, so common topics, very difficult topics, are like gender identity, because first and foremost, the counselor has to follow the school's messaging, right? And Singapore is quite traditional, and even only recently, the law about criminalizing homosexual acts, that was only recently taken down and things like that. So their take on certain stances is more traditional, more conservative, and that will have to reflect in their institutions, government institutions, MOE schools. So it puts a lot of pressure on the school counselors, because even if they do want to help the child, they may not have the capacity to provide the resources or the help that the child needs. And that's why I see they have to refer them out to find more individualized counseling, or with a professional that can really address some of the issues without compromising their jobs, essentially.
Right. And that can be tough too, because if a parent also has that issue or hasn't accepted their child for who they might want to be, then that can also be really tough, because then there's no means for the student to then seek help for themselves.
Yeah.
But that is another issue in itself.
No, but it's true, because school counselors, they have to deal with parents. They have to deal with the school, they have to deal with the student, they have to deal with parents. Yeah, and it's just like the trifecta. And then how do you balance out? Because as a counselor, you have to advocate for your client's interests. And who's the client? It's the student. But under your organization, there are regulations that you have to follow, and you also have to respect the parents' wishes, because they are the legal guardians. So it's very complicated. Yeah.
Okay. So how about if we compare what you can do as a private counselor?
with a school counselor.
Or in this situation, how that's different and what you could do with say this student.
Right. Generally, it depends on the organization that you're from. So if you're from like a faith-based counseling center,
You
they
don't
may
have to
also have
worry.
a stance. But in private practice, you can kind of operate on your own principles, and you can address more in depth certain issues or challenges that a school counselor may not be able to. Yeah. So I would say that's definitely one of the differences.
Right, and at least if it were to be against your own principles or morals and ethics, then you could potentially refer that to another team member or colleague,
Yes.
or even to a different in your scenario, a different counseling center.
Yeah, and it's not like they're attached to this counseling center like a student's attached to a school, right? So you have a little bit of free reign to, refer them to other resources and things like that. But for a school counselor, that student's going to be there for a few years, and it could be very stressful for them to know that they couldn't do anything, but they still have to see them, because the child may be still displaying some behavioral difficulties or so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that another key difference between private counseling and school counseling, and this is something that through Zoala, like through our research, speaking to schools, and also some of our school partners, we've learned that the ratio in Singapore, but also in Asia, some schools don't even have counselors. At least in Singapore, there's one. At least for every school, so that's really good. That's a really good starting point. But we like it's very known. It's common knowledge that the ratio of school students to a counselor is kind of crazy. 1 to 500, 1 to 800, and so there is that headcount and resource limitation. So there's also that difference.
Yeah, so it would definitely be more difficult to see, for example, a school counselor as often as you would like if they don't have the capacity to meet you, given how many other students that they have to see. So yeah, that's another big difference between school counselors and private counseling. Private counseling, you can probably schedule as many sessions as you would like or as they recommend, whereas school counselors, it's a little bit more limited by their availability.
Yeah, they're quite outnumbered.
Yeah.
I
actually went to a Singapore Association of Counselling, SAC, talk, and there were a few speakers, but one of them was Sean Ng, and he was a school counselor, I think, since 2006, and now he's a lead counselor under MOE's guidance branch, and he was talking about all of these. Actually, he was very popular because a lot of people wanted to know, how does MOE plan to address gender identity issues? How do they address the lack of school counselors and that huge ratio? And even at this talk where he was welcoming questions, he was also trying to answer them as well as he could, because just now I mentioned that, if I was in private counseling and my client wants to talk about gender identity, I don't have any hesitations about how I should say things or how or the conversation or anything. Whereas I said in a school setting, it's not that they can't talk about gender identity. It's that they just have to be mindful that what's happening in the counseling room is parallel to the school's messaging, right? And because Singapore is a multicultural nation, they have to be very mindful and very respectful to everyone's independent perspectives. If you teach one student about gender identity and a parent finds out and they don't agree, they're gonna be angry. So Sean at the talk was trying to address all these questions, and he said, it's true, school counselors have definitely come a long way. For example, educators are getting a lot of training for how to kind of like spot signs of social emotional difficulties and raising their own mental health literacy so that they can, provide a better supportive environment for students in the classroom.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, previously I had mentioned that I myself, as a teenager at my school, it was my teacher that helped identified some things that were going on and helped me through that, and then help like kind of alert my parents, but also then connect me with the school counselor. So that makes sense because the students spend so many hours with their teachers.
Yeah. So I think schools are trying the best that they can, and it's a continuous process, right? They're trying to continually better themselves, better the system. And I mean, I definitely see it, especially with MOE. They definitely recognize that Singapore has this academic emphasis and it's stressing a lot of kids out. And they've been trying to, change their mainstream systems, I think it was. Yeah. So they're changing a few things so that everything is not based on academic merit. And that with training the educators and trying to raise their mental health literacy, they have workshops, they have talks. So I definitely see the effort there. It's just that perhaps for a child who has a lot of challenges going on, a school counselor might not have as much resources as a private counselor may have. So I definitely would recommend for parents to consider definitely consider seeing the school counselor, because being in the school, they have more readily access to information about the student. But also you can approach other resources like family service centers. If private counseling is a bit too expensive, family service centers offer very cheap or most often free. A lot of organizations like Shine, they have complimentary mental health screenings. Same with WID. And there's a lot of resources out there for parents as well.
You touched upon in a school setting, it's really tough because a school counselor accepting one child, say if they had gender identity crisis, that might then affect another child because that's not their beliefs. So that makes sense. That it's a really fine line and very, very difficult. What about kids with learning difficulties?
So usually for those children with learning difficulties, schools counselors, they rolled out something called the Allied Educator, and you have learning and behavior support for students who maybe have dyslexia or ADHD, and they do allow they give them some allowance in terms of during tests they're allowed breaks right in between after a certain amount of time, so they do have that leeway. But a lot of people don't realize that these children with learning difficulties, they have secondary challenges that manifest because a student with dyslexia who is slower in reading and writing, he or she's gonna face some self-esteem issues potentially, because there's a lot of comparisons with their friends, a lot of frustrations perhaps in themselves that they have this condition.
Right.
So definitely don't just seek intervention for the dyslexia or for the ADHD, but also consider bringing them to a school counselor as well, or a private counselor, or a counselor from an FSC to address those secondary emotional challenges that may have.
Right, and help them manage them. So are you saying, for example, how to boost their self-esteem, or how to help them find? So if it's not academic where they can flourish, it's finding the other things. So they might be an artist, or a great dancer.
Yeah, so that's definitely a good point, because children, especially around 11 years old or 10 years old, they're in that life stage where they're trying to build a sense of competency and achievement. So it's very good for them developmentally to try out different skills and hobbies and interests to acquire a sense of a feeling of pride, oh, I can do this, and I've tried this and that was quite fun. But if you have this culture of academic merit and paired with learning difficulties, a lot of parents, because their child was diagnosed with some learning difficulties, they think, I need to get you in tuition, enrichment centers, I need to find you an intervention.
Study.
Yeah, and it really limits their time to work on their other very important developmental factors. Like physical development is often overlooked. Social development is also often overshadowed by that emphasis on trying to get them to study better.
That's a really good call, because I have not considered that someone with learning difficulties can and probably should focus on other things that they could be good at.
Yeah.
And then so for themselves, their self-esteem and competency, they can flourish elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny because when you mentioned that, I thought you were about to say at 10 or 11, all they're trying to focus on is how to fit in, which is also one
that will come in later.
Yeah.
when you hit teens.
Right.
But
because that is also a big struggle.
Yeah. But I mean, think about it. So at when you're 12 to 18, you're looking about identity and friendships and peer relationships and all of that. But how are you going to do that if you don't have the skills? Yeah. So when you're like a little bit younger, around late middle childhood, it's where friendships are kind of congregated to more meaningful, special relationships. So instead of having when you're 6, you go to school, everyone's your friend, right? You have all the kids in your preschool are your friends. And then as you get older, you hit 8, 9, and then it goes up to 11. Your circle of friendships is slowly kind of getting a little bit smaller. You're focusing more time on certain friends, and then you have a best friend, and then you have or very few closer friends. And friendships at that age are actually based on reciprocity, where it's an exchange. So here they actually learn about mutual kindness, mutual regard. I do something nice for you, you do something nice for me. That's where they kind of learn about the concepts of loyalty, willingness to share, willingness to trust each other. And those are all crucial for when they go to teenage years. And then they learn about, fitting in, finding their identities, understanding what values mean to them. So when you're in P5 or P6, and you have, a huge emphasis on academics and then learning disabilities, it's as important to find them a counselor.
Something that came to mind as we're talking about that as well. So food for thought for any listeners out there, especially those parents, that something occurred to me, that it's not just about trying to bring out the best in a child. But it's also when they also put into, or they discover what they can be good at, it's also the people around them. So if it's a dance studio or a sporting thing, they then can create that friendship group, which is very important. That they all share a common hobby or a common skill, if it's not so much academic, for an example. So that's a really good call, that hopefully parents can start to then realize that there is more outside of academics. Okay, so yes, we kind of diverged a little.
That's okay. But I mean, going back to the main the first topic, it is definitely I would say that they're trying to work within their means, school counselors, and although it might not always seem like it, there are a lot of things that they have to consider aside from the best option and for the child and the child's well-being and welfare. They also have to consider the organization they're from. They have to consider what resources they have access to. And if you are feeling like it's not a satisfying process, you could always find some other resources. There's plenty out there, other social service organizations as well, that might be a better fit. So try a few counselors and find that good fit for your child.
And I suppose it's also giving your school counselor the chance to work with you and your child in the means that they can, because they're also working and trying as hard as they can.
So actually I have a question for you. So in your, right, because I know Zoala has this app, right?
Okay, yes.
Right, and you're trying to help educators. So in what ways, based on what we shared and talked about, is that app going to tackle some of the some of the issues?
Okay. There's a lot that we can do in this space. So okay, so a few things come to mind, and one would be to support the child and the student. We're building our AI buddy, our wellness buddy, and it's designed to be a friend first and foremost, and like a cheerleader and a companion. So we've designed this so that it's accessible for all of the school students. They can speak to and they can chat to this bot that is designed to be their buddy. And so especially for those students that are struggling, don't know how to reach out to their school counselor, don't know how to reach out to their parents, if they have those gender identity crisis or learning disability, even those that might not be able to type as well, they can text it, speech to text.
Nice.
Yeah. And so that's one thing that comes to mind. But to support the school counselors, we have this triage dashboard where your whole school will be using our app in different ways. So they could be chatting. There's daily mood check-in. They could be journaling or doing their SMART goals. They're all like the learning management system. So I think there's a lot going on at Zoala, and we'll probably have, and actually one of the questions that we often get is about Zoala. So actually maybe in we'll definitely have other episodes where we bring in some of our other awesome team members to talk more about the product. But yeah, so all of these different aspects and different features then come together into this school counselors or educators dashboard. And
so they can kind of see
and see how the students are tracking, and so there's a few things that we want to highlight to the school counselor and to the educators. Of course, if the students are struggling, and this could be through keywords, so I'm cutting myself, or I'm I don't feel like I deserve to be on this world anymore, if they have any suicidal ideation, through keywords we highlight these students to the school counselor, so they can be on high alert, and keep a close eye on the student, maybe buddy them up with another student, or just really be additional support and a friendly face for the student, for example. But there's other things like tracking their mood, and everybody has ups and downs in their day, and so spikes up and down, that's perfectly normal. But it's about those students that you start seeing a trend, and without the data and seeing trends, you don't know where your students at. You might see them and be like, hey, what's up, how are you going? And if they're genuine, they might stop and chat and share a little bit. But if they're not, it's just like, hey, yeah, cool, great, and then they continue on their day. But this like tracking the data and those trends, it's seeing if there is that downward trend, and for a period of time. So being able to identify these kind of help the school counselors prioritize who they're seeing as well. And I know a lot of the school counselors we talk to, they have an open door policy, which is great, and some of them do really well. And there are also the students that know that support is there and is able to reach out, but it's those students that can't, or those students that don't. We don't want those students to fall through the cracks. Or it's like, they could be the 11th person in line out the doors, lining up to see the school counselor. So, but the school counselor has time to see the first 10, but it's really that 11th or the 12th child that really needs that support and their help. So it's trying to use technology, help the educators and the school counselors leverage technology, bring this all into one place so they can streamline their processes, make their their precious hours and their precious time to be more efficient and see the students that really need them. Trying to do a lot. We're getting there.
Yay.
So I mean, we value our school partners so much because we learn so much through them, And yeah, the students are amazing, and so it's been a lot of fun at Zoala. Yeah, this has been a fun ride.
Okay.
So yeah.
But thanks, you guys, for tuning into this episode. We hope that our conversation helps, bring a little bit more insight into what a school counselor's role is and what's the difference between them and a private practitioner, and why it might be a little bit more difficult for schools counselors to completely help a child given given the institute that they're in and the resources that they have.
Yeah. So as always, reach out. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. If you have any feedback, additional comments, do you have your own experiences with your school counselors, or as a school counselor, what are some of your experience? Feel free to reach out. We want to know. Yeah. And hope you guys enjoyed this episode. See you guys next time.
Thank you.
Bye.